A billionaire father secretly installs a hidden camera inside his own mansion to catch his long-trusted maid after hearing strange complaints. But what the camera records is something he never expected. At first, he thought he would simply confirm a few harmless mistakes, but that wasn't what happened at all, because the shocking truth revealed on the footage didn't show the maid disappointing him. It showed his fiancée doing things he never imagined she could be capable of. And that wasn't even the worst part, because what he witnessed on those hidden cameras wasn't just betrayal or manipulation. It was something so cruel, so irresponsible, and so dangerous toward his innocent baby that not even the worst enemy of a person would dare to do such a thing. What he sees forces him to question everything he believed about the woman he planned to marry, and pushes him into making a life-changing decision to protect his child, restore the maid's honor, and reveal the terrifying truth behind closed doors. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Coleman lived every day trying to balance a fast-paced business life with the demanding role of raising his baby, Andrew. His work required his attention from early morning to late at night, and he often felt stretched between meetings, calls, and planning. Even so, he always tried to make time for Andrew, holding him before leaving for the office or checking on him whenever he had a short break. The situation became even more challenging because he was a single father after a complicated breakup, and there were moments when he felt unsure about how to manage everything alone. In the middle of this routine, he relied on the support of the people working in his home. Among them was Grace Miller, the one responsible for cleaning and helping with the house. Her presence made the environment calmer, which Richard appreciated more than he could express. The house stayed in order because she understood exactly what needed to be done. Grace worked with quiet dedication, paying attention to each room and making sure everything remained clean and organized. She followed a routine that she had learned over time, knowing every corner of the house and what Andrew needed at different moments of the day. While Richard focused on his demanding schedule, Grace handled tasks such as arranging the baby's things, cleaning up after meals, and keeping the environment pleasant. Her actions were simple but important, allowing Richard to move through his responsibilities without worrying about small details at home. She never complained about the workload and carried out her tasks carefully and consistently. Richard often noticed how calm Andrew became when she approached, reacting with small smiles or quiet movements. Even though she was hired help, Grace always showed a warm and respectful attitude. Richard valued this because it gave him a sense of stability in a phase of life that felt unpredictable and exhausting. Richard's days followed a pattern that rarely changed, and this routine gave him a sense of control, even if the pressure was constant. He woke up early to prepare for meetings and deadlines, but he always stopped for a moment to check on Andrew. Sometimes he would watch the baby sleeping, feeling both comforted and overwhelmed by the responsibility he carried. Grace would usually arrive soon after, ready to start her work without needing reminders or instructions. She moved through the house efficiently, taking care of tasks that Richard barely had time to notice. While he sat at his desk responding to emails, he could hear the quiet sounds of Grace organizing things in the background. This helped him stay focused, knowing that nothing in the house was out of place. He understood that without her support, his life would be much more complicated, and he appreciated the sense of balance her presence brought into the home every day. Throughout the day, the house remained peaceful, despite Richard's intense workload. Whenever he crossed paths with Grace, they exchanged brief words about Andrew or small household matters. Their conversations were simple, but they reflected the trust building between them. Richard felt comfortable knowing that Grace was attentive to the baby's needs, especially when work forced him to stay in his office longer than expected. Sometimes he felt guilty for not being able to give Andrew as much time as he wanted, but seeing how gently Grace handled everything made him feel less worried. She always treated Andrew with genuine care, holding him carefully or adjusting his blankets when needed. This attention made Richard feel that his son was safe, even when he was unavailable. The more he observed Grace working, the more he recognized how much her consistency helped him cope with the heavy rhythm of his professional life. Richard often reflected on the contrast between the intense pressure of his corporate world and the calm atmosphere inside his home. At the office or in virtual meetings, he dealt with negotiations, deadlines, and decisions that demanded confidence and quick thinking. But at home, things moved at a slower pace, mostly thanks to Grace's steady presence. She made sure the house did not fall into chaos, even when Richard felt overwhelmed. He realized that she understood the emotional weight he carried, although they never discussed it directly. Her quiet professionalism offered support without needing words. Richard admired how she maintained the house with such discipline, keeping Andrew's space clean and comfortable. It reminded him that despite the challenges he faced after his difficult breakup, he was not entirely alone in managing daily life. This sense of reliability allowed him to face each day with a bit more strength. In the evenings, when Richard finally stepped away from work, he often found the house in perfect order. Andrew would be calm, resting or playing quietly, and it was clear that Grace's attention had made the day smoother. These moments allowed Richard to relax, even if only for a short time. He would hold Andrew, feeling relieved to have even a brief pause from the pressure outside. Grace would finish her tasks, making sure everything was ready for the next day. Richard noticed how her routine created a stable rhythm for the household, something he depended on more than he liked to admit. Though he rarely expressed it openly, he appreciated her dedication. It helped him manage the challenges of being a single parent while leading a demanding company. As each day ended, he felt grateful that despite the chaos of his professional life, his home remained a steady place where he could breathe. Richard met Megan Hart during a business dinner where he had expected nothing more than formal conversations and professional exchanges. However, he immediately noticed her because she carried herself with confidence and elegance. Her clothing, posture, and way of interacting with others made her stand out naturally. When they were introduced, Megan greeted him with an easy smile and a warm tone that caught his attention. Throughout the dinner, she spoke openly and seemed genuinely curious about his work and also about his life outside the company. Richard, who usually kept personal matters private, found himself answering her questions without hesitation. He felt surprised by how comfortable he was around her. Megan listened with interest and made small comments that showed she was paying attention. By the end of the evening, Richard left with the impression that he had met someone very different from the people he usually encountered in his busy corporate routine. Their connection developed faster than Richard expected. Megan continued showing strong interest in getting to know more about him, not only as a businessman, but also as a father. She spoke enthusiastically about her desire to be helpful and made it clear that she wanted to be part of his world. When Richard mentioned his son, Andrew, Megan immediately reacted with excitement, asking questions about the baby and expressing admiration for his efforts as a single parent. This reaction touched Richard, who wasn't used to receiving such attention regarding his personal struggles. Megan's extroverted personality made their conversations feel lively and engaging, and Richard enjoyed the way she made even simple topics seem important. As days passed after the dinner, they exchanged messages and calls, and Richard felt more and more drawn to the idea of spending time with her beyond the professional environment. When Megan first visited Richard's house, she behaved exactly as she had promised. She greeted the staff with friendly comments, smiling at everyone and quickly building a positive atmosphere. The employees seemed pleased by her presence, responding to her kindness with ease. Megan then focused on Andrew, approaching him with enthusiasm and making gentle attempts to play with him. However, Andrew did not react the way she expected. Instead of smiling or reaching out, he seemed unsettled, looking away or growing fussy when Megan interacted with him. Richard noticed this behavior but dismissed it as normal baby moodiness. He didn't want to assume anything negative, especially when Megan appeared so eager to form a connection. He believed Andrew simply needed time to adapt to someone new, and Megan herself brushed it off with a light comment, saying that babies sometimes reacted unpredictably. Encouraged by Megan's good intentions, Richard started including her more frequently in his home life. She visited the house often, always maintaining the same friendly attitude. She talked easily with the staff, who responded positively to her cheerful personality. In Richard's presence, she continued showing interest in Andrew, offering to help with small tasks and expressing admiration for how dedicated Richard was as a father. Richard began to feel a sense of comfort when she was around. Her enthusiasm made the house feel more lively, and her willingness to participate in daily routines made him consider possibilities he had not thought about in a long time. Even though Andrew still reacted strangely at times, Richard convinced himself that it was not something to worry about. He was too focused on the idea that Megan could bring something new and hopeful into their lives. As Megan's presence became more common in the house, she and Richard shared longer conversations, usually after Andrew was settled or while the staff finished their tasks. These talks allowed Richard to open up about parts of his life he usually kept guarded. Megan listened attentively, asking questions and sharing her own thoughts in a way that made him feel understood. The more time they spent together, the more Richard felt that she might represent a fresh start for him. The difficult memories of his past relationship made him cautious, but Megan's charm and confidence pushed those worries aside. She seemed genuinely interested in building something meaningful, and her positive attitude helped Richard imagine a future that was calmer and more complete. This idea grew stronger each time she visited, becoming something he looked forward to. By this point, Richard had begun seeing Megan not only as a pleasant companion, but as someone who might fit naturally into his family life. Her involvement with the household seemed smooth, and even though Andrew remained uncomfortable at times, Richard believed that time would change that. Megan continued treating everyone around her with kindness, making sure she left a good impression each time she came. Richard appreciated how she brought energy into the house, especially during moments when he felt overwhelmed by work. He also valued the attention she gave him, which made him feel noticed and supported in ways he had not felt since becoming a single father. As their bond deepened, Richard allowed himself to think that Megan might be the opportunity he needed to rebuild the idea of a family he once hoped to have, and he welcomed her continued presence in their routine. Megan's behavior began to change slowly, and Richard noticed it in small comments she made whenever Grace was around. At first, Megan only mentioned that she felt uncomfortable with how often Grace appeared near them, especially when they were talking or spending time with Andrew. She would say it casually, almost like a passing thought, but the message was clear enough for Richard to understand that something bothered her. Megan claimed that Grace paid too much attention to the baby and acted closer to the family than an employee should. Richard listened but did not react strongly because he knew how important Grace's role was in the house. Still, Megan's words stayed in his mind. Meanwhile, Grace continued working with the same dedication as always. She organized the rooms, took care of Andrew's needs, and followed her usual routine. She started noticing suspicious looks from Megan, but she chose not to question anything. Grace simply focused on doing her job the best way she could. As days passed, Megan's comments became more direct. She began saying that Grace behaved in a way she did not find professional, suggesting that the maid pushed herself into situations where she did not belong. Megan mentioned that Grace seemed too comfortable in the house, especially around Andrew. Richard found himself confused because he had always trusted Grace completely. He knew she had helped him during difficult times and had always shown respect and loyalty. However, Megan spoke with confidence, making it sound as if she was only trying to protect Richard and the baby. Grace noticed that the atmosphere had changed. Megan no longer hid her discomfort and would watch her closely while she worked. Even so, Grace remained calm and continued her tasks, avoiding any reaction that could be misunderstood. She understood her position and tried to keep the environment peaceful, even if she felt uneasy. Megan did not stop at simple observations. She started pointing out small details in Grace's work and calling them mistakes. She said that the employee sometimes handled things in a clumsy way or placed items in the wrong place, hinting that this could eventually affect the baby's safety. Megan used a tone that mixed concern and criticism, making her words seem caring, but also firm. Richard listened carefully every time she expressed these thoughts, unsure of how much he should worry. He tried to remember if he had ever seen Grace acting irresponsibly, but nothing came to mind. Still, the constant repetition of these ideas began to create doubts, even if small ones. Grace sensed the tension growing each time Megan mentioned something negative about her, but she tried to remain invisible, hoping that the situation would calm down. She knew she had always been careful, especially with Andrew, and she wondered why Megan suddenly questioned her so much. The more Megan insisted, the harder it became for Richard to ignore her concerns. She would bring up new examples, even minor ones, and link them to the baby's well-being. Sometimes she said that Grace seemed distracted or rushed, even though Richard had never seen signs of that before. Megan framed her comments as if she were only trying to help Richard make the best decisions for his home and his child. Richard felt torn between two important parts of his life: the trust he had built with Grace over time and the growing connection he shared with Megan. He tried to stay neutral, listening to both sides, but he couldn't stop himself from wondering whether he had overlooked something. Grace felt the growing pressure, but kept doing her duties with the same patience and dedication. She avoided unnecessary conversations and focused on Andrew's needs, hoping her work would speak louder than the criticism directed at her. With each passing day, Megan's tone became more insistent. She repeated her concerns, reminding Richard that he should pay attention to details before something serious happened. Her words were firm and consistent, and she often delivered them at moments when Richard was tired or stressed, making them harder to dismiss. Richard began feeling the weight of the situation. He respected Grace and valued everything she had done for his family, but he also felt responsible for listening to Megan, especially because she presented herself as someone who cared deeply about him and his child. He found himself thinking about the possibility that Megan might be noticing things he didn't see. Grace, on the other hand, continued dealing with the uncomfortable glances and whispered criticisms with professionalism. She chose silence, trusting that her loyalty and care for the baby were enough to show the truth. Eventually, the dynamic in the house shifted noticeably. Megan's comments were no longer occasional. They became a regular topic whenever she and Richard talked privately. She described Grace as someone who was slowly becoming unreliable, repeating the same concerns in different ways. Richard tried to stay calm, but the constant pressure made him question his own judgment. He knew he had always relied on Grace and had never seen anything that justified the criticisms, yet the persistence in Megan's voice affected him. Grace felt the atmosphere changing around her more clearly. She sensed that Richard was becoming distant in subtle ways, and although he never confronted her, she felt the tension. Still, Grace remained dedicated to her duties, caring for Andrew with the same affection and caution she always had. She hoped that Richard would remember her long history of loyalty and not let the growing criticism define her work. Megan decided to take her complaints about Grace even further and created a plan to make Richard believe that the employee was acting carelessly. She started by moving objects around the house on purpose, leaving them in places where they clearly did not belong. She placed certain items in positions that looked careless, as if Grace had forgotten to put them away correctly. Megan also put cleaning products near Andrew's things, arranging them in a way that made the situation look dangerous. She did everything quietly, making sure no one saw her. Later, she pointed out these problems to Richard with a concerned expression, saying she had noticed them several times. When Richard checked and found the items just as Megan described, he felt a sudden sense of uncertainty. He trusted Grace, but seeing these mistakes with his own eyes made him question whether he had missed signs of carelessness before. Richard confronted Grace about what he had found, expecting some kind of explanation. Grace, however, was completely confused because she knew she had not left anything out of place. She carefully explained her routine and insisted that she always kept cleaning products far from Andrew's things. But she struggled to prove her innocence, since the objects were exactly where Richard had seen them. The situation brought her a heavy feeling of frustration because she had always taken pride in her work. Richard listened, but the doubts planted by Megan were already growing. He wanted to believe Grace, yet the evidence looked too clear to ignore. Megan then stepped in with a concerned tone, saying she was only worried about the baby's safety. She acted as if she was trying to help Richard make the best decision for his son, speaking gently but firmly. Megan continued repeating that Grace was acting in a way that put Andrew at risk. She framed every accusation as a warning, telling Richard that these supposed mistakes could easily lead to something dangerous. Her tone was always worried, never aggressive, which made her words sound even more believable. Richard felt torn between the loyalty he felt toward Grace and the fear that Megan might be right. He remembered how dependable Grace had always been, but the situations he had seen made him question everything. Grace felt hurt and overwhelmed as she tried to defend herself. She spoke with sincerity, explaining how careful she had always been with Andrew and the entire house. Still, Megan kept insisting that the mistakes were happening too often and that Richard needed to act before something worse occurred. The growing tension made every conversation in the house feel heavier. Richard struggled with his thoughts throughout the day. He went over every past moment he could remember involving Grace and Andrew, searching for any sign that matched Megan's claims. But he couldn't recall anything like what he had found that morning. Even so, the image of the misplaced items in the nursery kept bothering him. Megan brought up the issue again later, speaking softly but with insistence. She told Richard that sometimes people changed or became overwhelmed and careless. She added that Andrew was too important to take risks. Richard felt exhausted, caught in a conflict between reason and emotion. Grace worked quietly in the background, noticing Richard's distant behavior. She wanted to approach him and explain everything again, but she didn't know how to prove something she didn't do. She hoped Richard would see through the accusations, but the atmosphere continued to shift against her. Grace tried to stay focused on her work, even though the tension made it difficult. She checked every corner of the house repeatedly, making sure nothing was out of place. She reviewed her tasks silently, wondering how the mistakes could have happened. The confusion made her feel desperate, but she kept her emotions controlled, especially around Andrew. She wanted to protect him from the stress surrounding the adults. Richard watched her at times, noticing how carefully she moved, which only made him feel more conflicted. He trusted what he saw, but he also remembered what he had found earlier. Megan, meanwhile, kept her calm and continued presenting herself as someone deeply worried. She stayed close to Richard, repeating that she only wanted to ensure Andrew's safety. She reminded him that a small oversight could lead to serious consequences. Her persistence continued shaping Richard's thoughts. By the end of the day, the pressure inside the house felt heavier than ever. Richard felt drained from trying to decide who to trust. On one side was Grace, who had been loyal and dedicated from the beginning. On the other was Megan, who insisted that Grace had become a risk. Megan repeated her accusations gently but constantly, reinforcing the fear that something dangerous could happen if Richard ignored the signs. Grace, unable to defend herself with evidence, felt the situation slipping out of her control. She sensed that Richard was distancing himself, even if he didn't say it directly. The house, once peaceful, now carried an atmosphere of suspicion. Richard stood in the middle of it all, unsure of what to believe. He wanted to protect Andrew above everything, but every choice felt painful. The conflict between trust and doubt grew stronger, creating a silence that neither Grace nor Richard knew how to break. Richard felt more pressure each day as Megan continued repeating her concerns, and eventually he made a decision that left him uneasy. He told himself he needed to act for Andrew's safety, even though he still was not completely certain about anything. After thinking about it for a long time, he decided to temporarily remove Grace from tasks that involved direct care of the baby. When he finally called her to talk, he struggled to explain his reasons. He said he needed to be careful and protect Andrew, and that the situation had become too confusing. Grace listened quietly, feeling shocked and hurt. She had cared for the baby from the beginning and knew she had never been careless. Hearing Richard question her work made her feel as if everything she had done no longer mattered. Megan stood nearby, watching the conversation with an expression that appeared worried, but her eyes revealed satisfaction. Grace tried to remain calm as she listened to Richard's decision, but inside she felt a deep sadness. She'd always taken great care with every task, especially those involving Andrew, and being removed from them felt like a punishment she did not deserve. She wanted to defend herself again, but she realized it would not change Richard's mind at that moment. His uncertainty was clear, and that hurt her even more. Grace knew her reputation in the house had always been strong, built through years of dedication and consistency, yet suddenly it seemed fragile. Megan continued acting as if she was only concerned about Andrew, speaking softly and suggesting that this was the safest option until things became clearer. Grace remained silent, trying not to show how much the situation affected her. Walking away from the conversation, she felt as though everything she had built was slipping away, replaced by doubt created through lies. Richard watched Grace leave the room with a heavy heart. Her sadness was obvious, and that made him question his decision even more. He replayed the recent events in his mind, trying to understand how everything had shifted so quickly. Megan stayed close to him, speaking slowly and reminding him that he was doing the right thing for Andrew. She repeated that sometimes difficult choices were necessary, especially when a child's safety was involved. Her words were calm, but Richard felt no relief. Instead, a sense of guilt began to grow. Grace had always been dependable, and part of him felt wrong for doubting her. Yet the images of misplaced objects and cleaning supplies near Andrew's things kept bothering him, making it hard for him to ignore Megan's warnings. He felt stuck between what he had always believed and what he feared might be true. The conflict weighed heavily on him, leaving him uncertain and uncomfortable. Megan continued to take on the role of someone worried and protective, offering gentle phrases about responsibility and caution. She reminded Richard that he needed to think about Andrew before anything else. Her voice was steady, and her expression showed sympathy, but something about it felt too controlled. Richard tried to focus on Megan's words, yet his thoughts kept returning to Grace's shocked face. He remembered all the times she had stayed calm, organized the house, and taken care of Andrew with attention and patience. He struggled to understand how someone like her could suddenly become careless or dangerous. Still, Megan spoke with confidence, insisting that stepping back from certain tasks was the safest choice. Richard nodded, even though inside he felt torn. He wondered if he was allowing fear to guide him instead of truth. That inner doubt continued growing, making him feel uneasy with every passing moment. Grace returned to her duties, but her movements were different now. The confidence she once carried had been replaced by uncertainty. She avoided areas related to the baby, following Richard's instructions, but the change made her feel distant from the routine she had always cared about. Each time she passed by Andrew's room, she felt a painful mixture of longing and frustration. She also sensed Megan's presence more than before, watching or commenting subtly, as if waiting for another mistake to appear. Grace kept her head down and did her work quietly, but inside she felt a strong desire to prove her innocence. She wished Richard would look past the doubts planted in his mind, but she knew it was not something she could control. Her only choice was to continue working with the same dedication, hoping that the truth would eventually become clear. Still, the sadness remained, making every task feel heavier than usual. Richard struggled with his emotions long after the decision was made. Even though he wanted to believe he was doing the right thing, he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. He walked through the house, noticing the quiet tension that had settled into every corner. Megan tried to reassure him, repeating that the temporary change was necessary, but her words did not ease the conflict he felt. He kept remembering moments when Grace had helped him during difficult times and how natural her care for Andrew had always seemed. Despite Megan's constant warnings, Richard sensed that the situation did not fully make sense. He felt guilty for doubting someone who had always been loyal, yet he also feared ignoring a possible risk. The confusion weighed on him, making him question not only Grace, but also his own judgment. As the house grew quieter, the distance between everyone increased, leaving Richard feeling more unsure than ever. Richard reached a point where doubt controlled nearly every thought he had. He could no longer trust what he saw or heard, and the pressure of choosing between Megan's warnings and his long history with Grace felt overwhelming. After thinking quietly for several days, he decided to take a step he had never considered before. Without telling anyone, he installed a small camera in the room where Andrew spent most of his time. He placed it in a discreet spot, one that blended naturally with the surroundings so no one would suspect anything unusual. His intention was simple: observe without anyone changing their behavior, because they knew they were being watched. Richard hoped that by watching the recordings, he could finally understand what was really happening. He believed that the camera would show whether Grace was making mistakes, or if the situations pointed out by Megan had another explanation. Even though the decision made him uncomfortable, he felt he had no other option left. Once the camera was in place, Richard returned to his routine, pretending everything was normal. He did not want Megan or Grace to sense any change in his behavior, because he needed them to act naturally. Every time he walked past the room, he felt a mix of guilt and relief. He knew watching people without their knowledge was not something he wanted to do, but he also felt responsible for protecting Andrew. Meanwhile, the camera remained hidden, quietly capturing every movement in the room. Richard wondered how long he would have to wait before finding answers, and whether he was prepared to see something unpleasant. The silence of his decision weighed on him, but he convinced himself that it was necessary. He hoped that by observing daily life in the house, the truth, whatever it was, would finally become clear. Until then, he kept his plan completely secret, knowing that revealing it too early could affect the outcome. Grace continued her work with noticeable caution. Her responsibilities involving the baby had been reduced, but she still moved about the house, performing smaller tasks. She tried to maintain her dignity despite the unfair situation, reminding herself that she had always acted with honesty. She avoided questioning Richard or Megan because she did not want to create more conflict. Still, she felt the emotional distance growing between her and the household. Grace worked quietly, trying to stay focused, even though she sensed that Megan now watched her even more closely. She felt powerless, unable to prove her innocence, and simply hoped that time would reveal the truth. The restricted nature of her duties made her feel disconnected from Andrew, which added to her sadness, but she kept her emotions under control. All she could do was continue performing her work with the same care she always had, despite feeling unwelcome. Megan, on the other hand, stepped into a more active role with confidence. She acted as though she had taken responsibility for solving the problems of the house. With Grace pushed aside, Megan spent more time around the baby, presenting herself as a reliable figure. She spoke to Richard about how she wanted to help and how important it was for Andrew to be safe. Megan seemed proud of the trust she believed she was earning, and she continued to behave as if she were the only one paying attention to the baby's needs. She moved naturally through the room, picking up toys or adjusting blankets, making sure Richard saw her as caring and attentive. The staff noticed her increased involvement, but they remained silent, unsure of what to say. Megan's presence became stronger each day, filling the space that once belonged to Grace, all while maintaining her calm, concerned appearance. Throughout the following days, the room where the camera had been installed became the main area where Richard's attention rested. Even when he wasn't watching the recordings, he thought about what the camera might capture. He imagined different scenes, some that worried him greatly and others that made him doubt Megan's claims even more. He knew that seeing the truth would bring clarity, but he also feared that it would force him to confront something painful. Meanwhile, Megan and Grace continued interacting in the room without realizing they were being observed. Grace moved carefully, wanting to avoid anything that could be misinterpreted. Megan moved confidently, believing she had control of the situation. Richard's silence remained steady. He avoided giving hints about his plan, knowing that only an honest, unfiltered view of the room would help him find the answers he needed. With each passing day, tension in the house continued to build. Richard tried to appear neutral, but inside he was nervous about what he would eventually discover. He wondered if he had been too trusting or not trusting enough. He replayed Megan's accusations in his mind, then remembered Grace's long history of dedication. Nothing felt clear anymore. Grace, still performing her limited duties, hoped desperately that Richard would eventually understand her side. Megan, acting confident, believed she had shaped the situation in her favor. All of them moved through the house with different intentions, unaware that the silent camera was gathering everything. Richard clung to the hope that the recordings would bring peace to his mind. He wanted certainty, something he could rely on, something that would finally make sense of the chaos. Until then, the house stayed divided, waiting for the truth that had yet to surface. Megan began spending much more time with Andrew once Grace was removed from tasks related to the baby. She acted confident, as if this new role belonged to her without question. When Richard was nearby, she held the baby with care, speaking in a soft and gentle tone to make herself look responsible. But when she thought no one was watching, her behavior changed noticeably. She sometimes held Andrew in a way that did not support him properly, letting his body bend in uncomfortable positions. At other moments, she shook him with more force than necessary, as if she were impatient or simply careless. Andrew reacted by crying, but Megan often ignored his discomfort. She focused more on keeping up her appearance than on what the baby actually needed. Grace saw a few of these moments from a distance, and although she said nothing, she felt her concern growing stronger each day. As Megan continued taking charge of the baby, her private behavior became even more troubling. She spent long stretches of time alone with Andrew, acting differently from the gentle caretaker she pretended to be. When Andrew cried, Megan sometimes turned away, choosing not to soothe him or even check what was wrong. She seemed irritated by the baby's reactions, and her movements looked careless rather than supportive. The camera Richard had installed recorded moments in which Megan held Andrew in a stiff, uncomfortable way. In some recordings, she laughed loudly while adjusting him roughly, as if she found the situation amusing instead of taking it seriously. These moments were entirely different from the loving image she presented when Richard entered the room. Grace noticed certain behaviors whenever she passed by, but she kept her distance, aware that Megan would use any excuse to accuse her again. Megan also ignored signs that Andrew needed attention. If he cried for too long, she acted annoyed rather than concerned, shifting her weight impatiently or sighing loudly. Sometimes she carried him with one arm in a way that made him look uneasy, but she did not adjust her grip. Her behavior revealed a lack of patience, especially when no one else was around. The camera continued capturing these details, showing moments when Megan handled the baby with thoughtless movements that made him cry louder. Yet whenever Richard stepped into the room, her entire posture changed instantly. She held Andrew close, pretended to comfort him, and spoke gently to make herself appear attentive. Grace watched these shifts from afar, unable to say anything without being blamed. Every time she attempted to go near Andrew, Megan spoke sharply or accused her of interfering, making it clear she was not welcome. The tension in the house grew heavier as Megan continued controlling access to the baby. She used every opportunity to make herself look like the perfect caretaker in Richard's eyes. Meanwhile, Grace kept noticing moments that disturbed her, like when Megan bounced Andrew too roughly or slapped her hand against his back as if she wanted him to quiet down. Grace knew something was wrong, but Megan always positioned herself between Grace and the baby, preventing any chance for her to help. If Grace tried to offer a suggestion, Megan responded with cold, accusing comments, insisting that Grace was overstepping. This made Grace feel even more powerless. She had watched over Andrew since his early days, and seeing him handled this way caused her deep worry. Still, she had no evidence she could present, and every time she approached, the accusations against her seemed to increase. Despite Megan's attempts to appear caring, her careless actions became more frequent whenever she felt confident no one was paying attention. She sometimes rocked Andrew in a way that made his head jolt back, or she placed him down without noticing whether he was comfortable. The camera caught moments where Megan lifted him abruptly, causing his arms to flail. In one recording, she laughed loudly while Andrew cried, acting as though his discomfort was something amusing instead of alarming. These scenes created a sharp contrast between her private behavior and her public personality. Grace, from a distance, watched the situation unfold with growing fear. She wanted to protect Andrew, but she also knew that stepping in could make things worse for her. Megan used every attempt Grace made as proof that she was interfering or trying to regain access to the baby improperly. Grace continued moving carefully around the house, doing her limited tasks while observing Megan's inconsistent behavior whenever she passed through the room. She carried a quiet concern in her expression, especially when she heard Andrew cry without comfort. Every instinct in her wanted to step in and soothe him, but each time she tried, Megan reacted with sharp accusations that pushed her away. Megan used these moments to convince Richard that Grace still posed a problem. Meanwhile, the camera kept recording everything, capturing the truth Megan worked hard to hide. Grace felt helpless, unable to defend herself or protect Andrew directly. She hoped that eventually someone, especially Richard, would see what she could not express. As the days continued, the household atmosphere grew heavier, shaped by Megan's false kindness, Grace's silent fear, and the hidden recordings quietly revealing a very different reality. Megan was alone with Andrew when her behavior crossed a line that had never been reached before. She lifted the baby into her arms, but instead of holding him safely, she suddenly turned him upside down, letting his head point toward the floor. Andrew began to cry loudly, clearly frightened and uncomfortable, but Megan laughed in an exaggerated way, acting as if the moment were nothing more than a silly joke. She swung him back and forth without noticing, or without caring, how distressed he was. Her laughter echoed through the room while the baby struggled in her grip. She seemed entertained by the reaction, not understanding the risk she was creating. Andrew's cries grew sharper, yet Megan did not stop. She kept smiling, enjoying the attention she believed she would receive for being playful. The scene revealed her complete lack of awareness of the baby's needs, and her actions showed a side of her that she always worked hard to hide from Richard. Grace stepped into the room at the exact moment Andrew was being held upside down. The sight shocked her deeply. She froze for a second, unable to believe what she was looking at. Then she rushed forward, her voice filled with urgency, asking Megan to stop immediately. Grace's fear was visible in her expression, because she knew how dangerous the situation was. She begged Megan to lift Andrew properly, reminding her that the baby could get hurt. But Megan barely glanced at her. Instead, she kept laughing and treated Grace's concern as an exaggeration. She acted as if Grace was ruining a harmless moment, ignoring the baby's loud cries and the obvious discomfort he showed. Grace felt powerless and terrified. She wanted to grab the baby herself, but she knew Megan would accuse her of interfering again. All she could do was plead, hoping Megan would listen before anything worse happened, but Megan did not stop. Her attitude remained relaxed, almost careless, as though she truly believed nothing was wrong. She held Andrew loosely, dismissing Grace's warnings, while swinging him again with no attention to his comfort. Grace continued begging her to stop, her voice shaking with fear, yet Megan responded only with more laughter. She acted irritated by Grace's reactions, insisting that she was simply playing with the baby. Andrew's cries grew more desperate, and Grace felt a panic rising in her chest. She could not understand how Megan could ignore such clear signs of distress. The moment felt endless, with Grace trapped between wanting to intervene and fearing another accusation. Megan's refusal to stop made the scene even more alarming. Her lack of empathy, paired with her forced laughter, revealed how deeply disconnected she was from the baby's needs. Grace stood there, horrified, unable to calm the crying child, while Megan continued her careless behavior. At that moment, Richard entered through the main door, unaware of what he was about to witness. As soon as he stepped inside, he saw Grace standing near Megan, with a terrified expression on her face. Then he noticed Megan holding Andrew, still unsettled and crying loudly. Megan's posture was relaxed, as if nothing were happening, while Grace looked pale and shocked. Richard stopped in place, confused by the contrast between their expressions. He sensed immediately that something was wrong, but the scene was so unexpected that he hesitated to speak. Megan looked toward him with a casual smile, trying to appear in control, while Grace stared at him as if silently begging for help. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The sound of Andrew's crying and the strained tension between the two women made it clear that the situation was far from normal, and Richard felt the weight of confusion settle over him. Richard stepped closer, trying to understand what had just happened. He saw how distressed Andrew was, still sobbing in Megan's arms, and he noticed how Grace could barely contain her panic. The contrast made him uneasy. Megan tried to explain in a light tone, claiming that she had only been joking around. But Grace immediately insisted that it was not a harmless moment, struggling to describe what she had seen. Her voice trembled with both fear and frustration. Richard stood between them, unsure whom to believe, but something felt terribly wrong. Megan's relaxed behavior did not match the look on Grace's face, and Andrew's trembling cries made him question everything he thought he knew about the situation. Grace pointed toward the baby, trying to show how uncomfortable he still was. Richard felt as if the room were closing in, his doubt returning stronger than ever. He knew he needed clarity, but confusion made it hard to react quickly. What Richard did not yet know was that everything had been recorded. The camera he had installed earlier captured the entire scene from beginning to end. It recorded Megan lifting Andrew upside down, laughing loudly while he cried. It captured her rough movements and her refusal to stop even when Grace begged her to. It also recorded Grace's horrified reaction, her desperate attempts to protect the baby, and her inability to intervene without being accused. The footage showed the truth exactly as it happened, without distortions or excuses. If Richard watched it, he would finally see the contrast between Meghan's public behavior and her private actions. The camera had captured every detail, the fear on Grace's face, the distress of the baby, and Meghan's careless amusement. While the room remained heavy with tension, the truth already existed, quiet, undeniable, waiting for the moment when Richard would finally look at it. Richard sat alone when he finally decided to open the video files from the hidden camera. His hands felt tense as he clicked on the first recording, unsure of what he would find. But the truth appeared almost immediately. He watched Meghan holding Andrew in a careless way, ignoring his cries, and acting nothing like the gentle person she showed him every day. Richard felt his chest tighten as he noticed the difference between her public behavior and the way she acted when she thought no one was watching. He moved to the next recording and saw Meghan shaking the baby with unnecessary force. Then he watched another moment where she laughed loudly while Andrew cried, clearly uncomfortable. The more he watched, the more disturbed he became. He had trusted Meghan, and seeing her behave like that made him feel sick. He already sensed something was wrong, but the videos proved it without leaving space for doubt. Unable to look away, Richard continued watching every second of footage. He wanted to know if there was any truth in Meghan's accusations against Grace, or if everything had been a lie. In the recordings, he saw Grace entering the room multiple times with calm behavior, moving carefully around the baby, always checking his comfort and safety. She never appeared careless or distracted. Instead, she showed the same responsibility he had seen for years. When he reached the video showing Meghan lifting Andrew upside down, Richard felt shock rush through him. The baby's terrified cries were clear, and Meghan's exaggerated laughter made the situation even worse. But what affected him most was Grace's reaction. She ran into the room with fear in her eyes, begging Meghan to stop. There was no hesitation or doubt in her voice, only genuine concern for Andrew. The video made everything painfully clear. Grace had never been the problem. Richard paused the video and leaned back, trying to process everything he had learned. He felt a heavy mix of anger and guilt. He had believed Meghan's words, even though Grace had always proven herself reliable. He remembered every moment when Meghan complained about Grace, every accusation that made him question someone who had helped him through difficult days. He realized now that Meghan had manipulated him from the beginning. She created situations, lied about what she saw, and acted carefully whenever he was nearby to hide her true behavior. Richard replayed several moments in the footage, almost hoping he had misunderstood something, but it was impossible. Each recording showed the same pattern. Meghan acted irresponsibly with the baby whenever she was alone, and Grace acted with professionalism every time she appeared. The truth was undeniable, and Richard felt betrayed in a way he had never expected. As the shock settled, another feeling rose strongly inside him: fear. He feared what could have happened to Andrew if he had trusted Meghan completely and removed Grace entirely from his routine. The video showing Meghan swinging the baby upside down kept replaying in his mind. He imagined how badly things could have ended if Grace hadn't walked into the room at that exact moment. The idea that he had allowed someone like Meghan near his son made him feel sick. He wondered how many times she had behaved irresponsibly before the camera was installed. The thought haunted him. He watched again the part where Grace tried to stop Meghan, noticing how desperate she looked. Her reaction left no room for doubt about her loyalty. She had been the only one trying to protect Andrew. Richard felt both grateful for her actions and ashamed of how he had doubted her. Richard's thoughts grew heavier as he replayed the videos again. Each replay made his anger toward Megan stronger. She had fooled him, manipulated his emotions, and created false stories to harm someone innocent. Worse than that, she had put his son in danger repeatedly, hiding behind a fake image of concern. He remembered every moment she insisted that Grace was reckless, and now he realized those comments were part of a plan. She wanted Grace out of the way so she could take control. The recordings confirmed everything. Megan intentionally created scenes to make Grace look irresponsible, placing objects in risky spots and pretending she had discovered them by accident. Richard saw how Grace reacted with confusion and sadness in the videos, where she tried to understand why the accusations kept happening. Seeing this cut deeply into him. He had allowed a loyal and hard-working woman to suffer for something she never did. By the time he finished watching all the footage, Richard knew he had to act immediately. The betrayal was too serious to ignore, and Andrew's safety was more important than anything else. He felt a strong determination replace his confusion. He could no longer let Megan act freely in the house after seeing what she was capable of. He also felt the urgent need to make things right with Grace. She had been falsely accused, punished unfairly, and humiliated because he failed to trust his own instincts. Richard knew he couldn't take back the pain he had caused her, but he could correct the situation before it grew worse. He closed the laptop with a firm motion, took a deep breath, and prepared himself to confront Megan. The truth was finally clear, and he would do whatever was necessary to protect his son and restore justice to Grace. Richard did not hesitate once he understood the full truth. He picked up his phone and contacted the police, explaining that he had recordings showing dangerous behavior toward his baby. When the officers arrived, he handed over every video file without hiding anything. He wanted the authorities to see exactly what had happened, from Megan's reckless actions to Grace's desperate attempts to protect Andrew. The officers assured him that they would analyze the recordings carefully and take the necessary steps. Megan was asked to go with them to give her statement, and although she tried to act confused, Richard no longer paid attention to her excuses. Watching her leave the house felt strange, but also relieving. For the first time in a long while, he felt that Andrew was truly safe. With Megan gone, the atmosphere in the house immediately became calmer. Richard held Andrew close, feeling both protective and grateful that the situation had not ended in something worse. After the police left, Richard focused on repairing the damage caused by the false accusations. His first step was to speak with Grace. He asked her to meet him privately, and when she entered the room, he could see how much the recent events had affected her. She stood quietly, unsure of what to expect. Richard apologized sincerely, explaining that he had watched all the recordings and finally understood what had been happening. He admitted that he had doubted her unfairly and regretted the suffering she had experienced. Grace listened with emotion, and although the situation had hurt her deeply, she appreciated his honesty. Hearing him acknowledge the truth helped ease some of the weight she had been carrying. Richard told her she was welcome back to her full responsibilities and that he trusted her completely. Grace accepted, relieved to have her name cleared and her work respected again. With Grace returning to her routine, the house slowly regained its balance. She resumed all the tasks she used to perform, especially those involving Andrew. She handled the baby with the same tenderness she'd always shown, checking his comfort, calming his cries, and keeping everything organized. Richard observed her quietly at times, realizing how much he had depended on her calm presence without truly noticing before. Andrew also reacted positively, settling more easily and seeming more relaxed when Grace was nearby. Her return brought stability back to the home, replacing the tension and doubt that had built up during Megan's presence. Grace felt more confident again, reassured that Richard believed in her once more. She worked with renewed dedication, wanting to help restore peace to the house and provide Andrew with the safety he needed. Richard took steps to reorganize the environment completely. He removed every trace of Megan from the house and made sure she would have no further access to him or to Andrew. Ending the relationship felt necessary and urgent. He no longer wanted someone capable of such harmful behavior anywhere near his son. While sorting through the rooms she had often occupied, he felt a mixture of relief and frustration, knowing how easily he had been manipulated. But he also felt determined not to let anything like that happen again. He reviewed the safety measures in the house, ensured that Andrew's environment was secure, and reinforced the trust he shared with Grace. The home slowly regained a sense of normality, with routines returning to the way they had been before Megan's interference. Richard felt grateful that the truth had come to light before more damage was done. As the days went by, Richard and Grace rebuilt the trust that had been shaken. Their interactions became warm and natural again, without the tension that had previously clouded them. Richard made a point of showing appreciation for her work, acknowledging how much she had done for him and Andrew. Grace responded with the same loyalty she had always shown, proud to care for the baby and maintain the household. The peace in the home grew stronger as both of them settled back into familiar roles. Andrew thrived under Grace's care, sleeping better, crying less, and responding happily to her presence. For Richard, this confirmed once again that she had always been the right person to rely on. The bond between them, built on years of dedication and responsibility, became even more solid after everything they had faced. In time, the house returned to what it once had been, a stable, organized, and safe environment for Andrew. Richard felt more confident in his decisions and more attentive to the people around him. He knew he had made mistakes, but he also understood that correcting them had brought him back to the right path. Grace continued caring for Andrew with affection and professionalism, grateful that the home had regained peace. Richard prioritized his son above everything else, determined never to allow danger or manipulation to enter their lives again. With Megan out of the picture and the truth fully revealed, the household finally felt whole, and day by day, Richard, Andrew, and Grace moved forward, rebuilding a sense of security together and leaving behind the turmoil that had once threatened their home. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.